The general loomed over the female recruit, his boot pressing her face into the mud as 40 men watched in stunned silence. "This is why women don't belong in elite units," he snarled, grinding his heel into her shoulder. No one dared intervene, but something changed in her eyes, not submission, but calculation. When he finally allowed her to stand, her movements shifted, becoming fluid and precise. The transformation was subtle until she executed a perfect counter that sent the general crashing face first into the same mud where he'd humiliated her. The base froze in collective shock at what they'd just witnessed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of quiet strength inspire you, subscribe to see more moments when the underestimated reveal their true power. Dawn broke over Fort Callister, a sprawling military training ground nestled in harsh terrain. The facility was infamous for its brutal conditioning program that prepared soldiers for elite combat roles. Morning fog hung low over the obstacle course as recruits assembled for their daily training ritual, the sun barely piercing the haze to cast long shadows across the muddy field. The temperature had dropped overnight, leaving a biting chill in the air that seeped through standard-issue uniforms. 40 recruits stood in formation, their breath visible in small clouds that dissipated quickly in the morning air. Most shifted from foot to foot, trying to generate warmth without breaking position, their faces showing the strain of weeks of intense training. Astria Rhodes stood in formation with the others, one of only 3 women in the unit. She maintained perfect posture despite evident fatigue, her uniform immaculate compared to her mud-spattered colleagues. Nothing about her suggested special status or privilege. Average height, athletic but not exceptionally muscular, no insignias or markings that differentiated her from the others. Only her eyes, scanning the field with unusual focus, hinted at something beyond the ordinary. The unit's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, observed from a distance, his expression revealing nothing as General Varick approached the formation. Varick moved with the swaggering confidence of a man whose authority had never been questioned, his scarred face and perpetual scowl designed to intimidate. His dress uniform bore the weight of multiple combat decorations, symbols of a career built on traditional notions of military excellence. "Morning, maggots!" he bellowed, pacing before the formation with deliberate steps that left deep impressions in the soft ground. 14 of you are still here who should have quit weeks ago." His gaze deliberately lingered on Astria, the contempt in his expression unmistakable. "Some of you are only here because the Pentagon wants to play social justice warrior with our combat readiness." Several male recruits smirked, exchanging knowing glances. Astria's expression remained neutral, her focus seemingly on a point in the distance beyond Varick. The insult rolled off her like water, leaving no visible impression, which only seemed to irritate Varick further. The morning light strengthened, burning away some of the fog and illuminating the training ground more clearly. Various obstacle courses and combat simulation areas became visible, all designed to push human endurance to its limits. This was where the military forged its elite fighters, or so the tradition claimed. "Today's evolution, hand-to-hand combat assessment," Varick announced, scanning the formation with a predatory gaze. "Rhodes, front and center. Let us see if the women's program has anything to offer besides filling quotas." Astria stepped forward without hesitation, facing Varick with composed readiness. The other recruits formed a circle around them, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable anticipation to barely concealed amusement. The morning birds fell silent, as if sensing the tension that had settled over the group. "Rules of engagement, General?" she asked, her voice steady despite the public scrutiny and implied challenge. "Rules?" Varick laughed, the sound deliberately theatrical for his audience of recruits. "Combat has no rules, Rhodes, but I will go easy on you. All you have to do is stay standing for 30 seconds. Among the watching recruits, Farron Isaacs shifted uncomfortably, the only other female recruit in view. Beside her, Recruit Dawson whispered something that made nearby men chuckle, their eyes fixed on what they clearly expected to be an entertaining demonstration of female inadequacy. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne's attention sharpened, though he made no move to intervene. His stance suggested a man accustomed to witnessing Varick's methods, perhaps weighing the costs of challenging a superior officer against the benefits of protecting a recruit from unnecessary humiliation. "Begin!" shouted Varick, immediately launching into a series of aggressive maneuvers designed to overwhelm. Astria defended capably, her technique solid but not extraordinary. Her movements suggested formal training rather than street fighting, disciplined, controlled by the book. Nothing in her performance suggested unusual skill, just adequate preparation. Morning sunlight glinted off the metals on Varick's uniform as he moved, a visual reminder of the power imbalance between them. The circle of recruits maintained a respectful distance, their expressions gradually changing as they watched the exchange unfold. "This what they teach women now?" Varick taunted, easily slipping past her guard with a feint and follow-up that forced her to retreat a step. "How to look pretty while getting your butt handed to you." The circle of recruits had grown silent, the entertainment value of the lesson giving way to discomfort as the one-sidedness became apparent. Several glanced at each other uneasily, recognizing that this had moved beyond, training into something more personal. When Astria successfully blocked a strike, Varick's expression darkened. He escalated unexpectedly, sweeping her legs with a move that went well beyond the intensity appropriate for a training demonstration, sending her hard to the ground. The impact was audible, drawing involuntary winces from even those recruits who had been most dismissive of her. Mud splashed as she hit the ground, soiling her previously immaculate uniform. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present, a visual reminder of what Varick believed was her proper place in the hierarchy. 22 seconds, he announced, standing over her with a satisfied expression. "Not even close to combat ready. This is why we do not need diversity quotas in elite units." Astria began to rise, maintaining her composure despite the mud now covering half her uniform and the public embarrassment. Before she could regain her footing, Varick planted a boot on her shoulder, pressing her back into the mud. "Stay down, Rhodes. Know your place." The training ground fell silent. Even the usual sycophants looked uneasy at this public humiliation that had moved beyond tough training into something personal. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne stepped forward slightly, then hesitated, his authority momentarily paralyzed by the established hierarchy and the potential disruption of intervening. From the ground, covered in mud, Astria's eyes met Thorne's briefly. Something passed between them, not a plea for help, but an unspoken communication that contained more information than should have been possible in a momentary glance. Then her gaze returned to Varick, who continued to hold her down with his boot, making his point to the watching unit. The pressure from Varick's boot increased as he leaned forward, his voice pitched to carry to the entire unit. "This is what happens when we let politics dictate military readiness," he announced, clearly enjoying his moment of complete dominance. "Some people simply do not have what it takes, and no amount of sensitivity training will change that reality." Astria remained still beneath his boot, but something had changed in her eyes. The submission Varick expected was not there. Instead, a focused calculation had replaced it, as though she was making a decision rather than simply enduring humiliation. Her breathing had slowed, becoming more controlled and deliberate, a subtle change that went unnoticed by everyone, except perhaps Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, whose attention had not wavered. "Something to say, Rhodes?" Varick asked, noticing her changed expression. Even he seemed to sense the shift, though he could not identify its nature. "Permission to continue the exercise, General," she responded, her voice steady despite her position on the ground. There was no anger in her tone, no hint of the humiliation she should have been feeling, just a calm request that seemed oddly disconnected from the reality of her current situation. Varick laughed, a sound that did not quite convey the confidence he clearly intended. "Still think you have something to prove? Fine. Let us see what else they taught you in your special program." He removed his boot, stepping back with theatrical magnanimity that did not quite mask his genuine curiosity about what she might try next. Several recruits exchanged glances, sensing that something unexpected was developing in what should have been a routine demonstration of the established order. As Astria rose from the mud, her movements shifted subtly. Gone was the by-the-book technique from before, replaced by a fluid economy of motion that suggested much more advanced training. She did not brush off the mud or show any sign of discomfort or embarrassment. Instead, she settled into a stance that, to the untrained eye, might have appeared similar to her earlier position, but contained fundamental differences that radically altered its effectiveness. Among the watching recruits, one of the men, Recruit Latimer, narrowed his eyes in recognition. "Wait, is she?" He began to whisper to his neighbor, but stopped as Astria fully regained her footing, something in her transformed presence commanding complete attention. "Ready when you are, General," she said, her voice betraying nothing of what might follow. But her stance told a different story to anyone with the training to recognize it, a story that was just beginning to dawn on a few of the more experienced recruits in the circle. Varric, not noticing the change, moved in with the same aggressive tactics that had worked moments before. This time, Astria sidestepped with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Rather than engaging directly, she used his momentum against him, executing a textbook defensive maneuver that maintained her position while forcing Varric to recover his balance. The move was subtle but effective, the kind taught in advanced close-quarters combat courses rather than basic training. Several of the watching recruits straightened slightly, recognizing the technique even if they could not quite place it. The morning light now fully illuminated the training ground, highlighting the contrast between Varric's increasingly aggressive movements and Astria's controlled responses. Irritation crossed Varric's face as his easy victory evaporated. The script had changed without warning, and his audience was witnessing a performance decidedly different from the one he had planned. He increased the intensity, throwing combinations that would overwhelm most recruits at this stage of training. His movements became less instructional and more personally driven, a clear intent to reassert dominance rather than demonstrate technique. Astria responded with defensive techniques that seemed increasingly familiar to some of the watching recruits, especially Latimer, whose expression had transformed from casual interest to stunned recognition. His eyes followed each, movement with growing certainty, pieces of a puzzle visibly falling into place in his mind. "Where did you learn that sequence?" Varric demanded, backing off momentarily. The question was not merely tactical, but betrayed genuine surprise, as though he had recognized something he had not expected to see in this context. "Standard training, General," Astria replied, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. Nothing in her tone suggested deception, yet the statement clearly did not align with Varric's understanding of standard recruit preparation. The circle of observers had grown perfectly still, the morning birds the only sound beyond the controlled breathing of the two combatants. What had begun as entertainment had transformed into something else entirely, a demonstration that carried implications beyond this single encounter. "Bull!" Varric spat, abandoning any pretense of a training exercise. His next attacks came with full force, designed not to teach, but to hurt, to reassert dominance through superior strength and aggression. The movements crossed the line from demonstration into combat, a distinction not lost on the increasingly uncomfortable recruits watching the exchange. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne took a definitive step forward now, clearly about to intervene, but stopped as Astria executed a perfect defensive counter that left Varric momentarily exposed. She did not press the advantage, instead returning to a neutral stance, giving him the opportunity to reset. The restraint was as telling as the technique, suggesting both advanced training and exceptional discipline. This controlled restraint infuriated Varric more than any attack could have. It represented a challenge to the fundamental power dynamic he had established, not through opposition, but through a demonstration of superior skill and composure. "Stop dancing and fight, Rhodes," he shouted, his composure cracking visibly. The command revealed his growing frustration, exposing a vulnerability that undermined his carefully cultivated image of unassailable authority. "This is a defensive assessment, General," she replied evenly. "I am following the established protocol for this exercise." Her calm citation of regulations in the midst of what had become a personal attack pushed Varric over the edge. The reminder of protocol highlighted his departure from it, a public acknowledgement of his loss of professional control that he could not tolerate. He charged forward, abandoning technique for brute force, clearly intent on putting her back on the ground where he believed she belonged. The movement was telegraphed by both his body language and the flash of anger that preceded it, an emotional response rather than a tactical decision. The watching recruits had fallen completely silent now, the entertainment factor gone, replaced by the uncomfortable recognition that they were witnessing something inappropriate. Even Dawson and the other recruits who had been smirking earlier now appeared concerned, sensing the line between training and personal vendetta had been definitively crossed. In the moment before contact, Astria's posture shifted one final time. Her defensive stance transformed into something more advanced, a position familiar to anyone with specialized close-quarters combat training. The stance was not taught in standard military courses but was reserved for specialized units with specific tactical requirements. When Varric reached her, Instead of being overwhelmed by his superior weight and strength, she redirected his momentum with textbook precision, using his own force against him. The result was as inevitable as it was shocking. Varric, overcommitted and off balance, found himself thrown forward, landing hard on the same muddy ground where he had humiliated Astria minutes before. The technique was executed with perfect control, designed to neutralize without injury, revealing training far beyond what any recruit should possess. For a moment, the training ground was completely still, the collective breath of 40 recruits held in stunned silence. The reversal was so complete, so unexpected, that no one seemed to know how to respond. Varric himself appeared momentarily disoriented, as much by the sudden inversion of his expected reality as by the physical impact. The mud that had been a symbol of Astria's humiliation now clung to Varric's dress uniform, a visible manifestation of the power shift that had just occurred. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet, as if nature itself was processing the unexpected turn of events. Varric rose from the mud, rage replacing any pretense of professional demeanor. His face had flushed deep red, the veins in his neck visibly pulsing with anger. "You are finished, Rhodes," he snarled. "Pack your bags. You are out of this program." The threat might have carried weight minutes earlier, but now rang hollow in the wake of the demonstration they had all witnessed. Something fundamental had changed in the power dynamic, and everyone present felt it. The authority that had seemed absolute now appeared conditional, dependent on a respect that was quickly evaporating. Before he could continue, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne's voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, General Varric." The command was delivered with quiet authority that nonetheless carried across the entire training ground. There was no need to shout. The complete silence that had fallen over the assembly ensured every word was heard distinctly. Thorne approached the circle, his presence immediately altering the dynamic further. The recruits straightened instinctively, responding to the command authority that radiated from him despite his quiet tone. There was a certainty in his movement that suggested he was not responding to unexpected events, but rather to a situation unfolding exactly as anticipated. "Rhodes," Thorne addressed her directly. "Identify yourself properly for the unit." The instruction carried significance beyond the words themselves, as though activating a predetermined protocol. Astria's response confirmed this impression, transforming the moment from surprising to deliberate. Astria came to attention, mud still covering half her uniform. Despite the soil and dishevelment, her bearing conveyed absolute military precision. "Captain Astria Rhodes, 5th Special Forces Group, Combat Application Specialist, sir. Currently assigned to the Pentagon's Combat Integration Assessment Task Force." The revelation rippled through the watching recruits like a shockwave. Dawson's jaw literally dropped, the cocky smirk replaced by stunned disbelief. Latimer nodded slightly, his earlier recognition confirmed. Other recruits exchanged glances, processing the implications of what they were hearing. The morning sun now fully illuminated the scene, as though nature itself was participating in the revelation. What had been hidden in the fog and shadows of early morning was now exposed in the clear light of day, not just Astria's true identity, but the fundamental flaws in the training system she had been sent to evaluate. "Captain Rhodes," Thorne continued, "has been embedded with your unit for the past 3 weeks as part of a comprehensive review of training protocols across all elite combat programs. Her assignment was known only to myself and base command." This additional information completed the transformation of the narrative. What had appeared to be a public humiliation of a female recruit had been revealed as something entirely different, a professional assessment by a highly qualified officer specifically tasked with evaluating the training environment. Varric's face drained of color as the implications became clear. His behavior had not merely been inappropriate toward a recruit, but had constituted insubordination toward a superior officer conducting an official Pentagon assessment. "Sir, I was not informed," he began, his tone a mixture of anger and dawning alarm. "That was the point, General." Thorne cut him off. An unbiased assessment required authentic interactions. Captain Rhodes was inserted into this training cycle specifically to experience and evaluate the environment as a recruit would. The strategic brilliance of the approach was not lost on the watching recruits. By embedding an experienced combat officer posing as a recruit, the assessment team had gained unfiltered access to the actual training environment, rather than the sanitized version that might have been presented to official observers. Thorne turned to address the entire unit, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Captain Rhodes is not only qualified for this training, but has already completed it, along with advanced courses that most of you will never have the opportunity to take. She has 3 combat deployments and a Silver Star that I suspect none of you have heard about, because she does not wear her accomplishments like badges of honor. The information landed with particular impact on those who had been most dismissive of Astria's capabilities. The contrast between their assumptions and the reality created a cognitive dissonance that registered clearly on their faces. What they had interpreted as weakness or special treatment was revealed as deliberate restraint from someone operating at a level far beyond their own. Astria maintained perfect military bearing throughout this revelation, neither gloating nor appearing uncomfortable with the attention. Her composure remained exactly as it had been throughout, suggesting that both her earlier apparent submission and her current revealed authority were expressions of the same disciplined character rather than inconsistent behaviors. "Sir," Astria addressed Thorne, "request permission to continue with today's scheduled training. The recruits should not lose valuable instruction time." Her request demonstrated a focus on the mission rather than personal vindication, another indicator of her professional character that added weight to the revelation of her true identity. The morning sun highlighted the contrast between her mud-covered appearance and her composed military bearing, a visual metaphor for substance over appearance. "Denied, Captain," Thorne replied. "I believe we have all received sufficient instruction for one day." He turned to Varric. "General, my office, immediately." The directive left no room for discussion or delay. As Varric followed Thorne from the training ground, his shoulders stiff with contained rage, the dynamic among the recruits transformed completely. The hierarchy that had seemed so firmly established just minutes earlier had been fundamentally reordered, leaving them to process not just the revelation about Captain Rhodes, but also their own behavior in the preceding weeks. As the commanding officers departed, the formal structure of the training session dissolved. Recruits who would normally maintain rigid discipline began to shift, gather in small groups, and speak in low voices. The singular revelation had not just exposed Varric, but had forced a collective self-examination that was clearly uncomfortable for many present. Farron Isaacs approached Astria first, stepping forward from the still-stunned group. Her posture reflected a mixture of respect and lingering disbelief. "You knew all along," she said, not a question, but a realization. Every time he targeted the women in the unit, every lesson about why we do not belong here. "My assessment was not just about General Varric," Astria responded quietly. "It was about the entire training culture. Who spoke up, who stayed silent, who enjoyed the show." Her words carried no accusation, just a factual description of her mission parameters. Her gaze swept across the male recruits, many of whom now found the ground intensely interesting. The mud that had been a symbol of her humiliation now represented something else entirely, the exposed foundation of a system that had confused cruelty for effectiveness, dominance for leadership, and tradition for merit. Latimer stepped forward, professional curiosity overcoming the awkwardness of the moment. "Fifth group, ma'am?" he asked. "My brother served with them in Syria. He said they had some female operators attached who were the real deal. I am guessing that was your unit." "I do not discuss operational details, recruit," she responded. But there was a new respect in her tone, acknowledgement of someone who had recognized her skills before the revelation. The exchange marked the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one based on genuine respect rather than enforced hierarchy. As the initial shock wore off, the recruits began to process what they had witnessed. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, or pitied had been evaluating them the entire time. Their behavior, their character, their worthiness for the elite positions they sought had been under expert assessment by someone they had underestimated entirely. The recognition created a palpable discomfort among those who had been most dismissive, forcing a recalibration of assumptions that had seemed unquestionable just an hour earlier. 1 week later, the training unit assembled on the same field. But the atmosphere was markedly different. The morning sun illuminated a formation that stood straighter, more alert, more purposeful than before. A new instructor, Colonel Orion, led the morning exercise with demanding precision, but without Varric's theatrical cruelty. Rumors about Varick's fate circulated among the recruits. Some said he was reassigned to a remote outpost in Alaska, others that he was forced into early retirement. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. A disciplinary hearing, followed by reassignment to a non-training position, his career effectively stalled. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne addressed the unit, now standing with several other officers including Astria, who wore her full uniform with proper rank insignia for the first time since her arrival. The sight of her decorations and combat patches created a visual reinforcement of the revelation that had transformed the training culture. The purpose of elite training is not to break soldiers, but to build them, Thorne began, his voice carrying across the now silent formation. Somewhere along the way, that fundamental truth was lost at Fort Callister. Captain Rhodes's assessment has given us the opportunity to realign our methods with our actual mission. He outlined changes to the training protocols, emphasizing that standards would remain exactly as high, but the methods of achieving them would focus on building excellence rather than leveraging humiliation. The goal was not to make the program easier, but to make it more effective, producing better warriors through better training. Captain Rhodes will be departing today to submit her final report to the Pentagon's task force, Thorne concluded. Before she goes, I have asked her to share a few words with you. Astria stepped forward, her bearing professional but approachable. The mud from the previous week was gone, replaced by the unmistakable presence of a combat-tested officer confident in her authority. 3 weeks ago, I arrived as a recruit with the same qualifications as many of you, she began. The only difference was perception, yours and sometimes my own. I was judged not on my capabilities, but on assumptions about what those capabilities must be based on my gender. She scanned the faces before her, making brief eye contact with several recruits who had been particularly dismissive. The directness of her gaze contained no accusation, simply an invitation to recognize the reality of what had occurred. The future of elite combat units depends not just on physical strength or tactical knowledge, but on adaptability, perception, and judgment. Those who could not see beyond their biases missed critical intelligence in the field, me. In combat, that kind of tunnel vision gets people killed. Her words landed with particular impact on Dawson and the other recruits who had been most vocal in supporting Varick's behavior. Several shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the professional critique embedded in her observation. The standards do not change, she continued. They never should. But our understanding of who can meet those standards must evolve if we want the best possible fighting force. I look forward to serving alongside those of you who complete this training, not as male or female operators, but simply as qualified ones. As she concluded, Latimer initiated something unexpected. He called the unit to attention and offered Astria a sharp, formal salute, a gesture of professional respect, traditionally reserved for significant moments of recognition. One by one, the other recruits joined him, including, after a moment's hesitation, Dawson. The salute spread through the formation until all 40 recruits stood at attention, offering formal acknowledgement to the officer they had failed to recognize. Astria returned the salute with perfect military precision, completing the symbolic circle. What began as humiliation had transformed into professional respect, not demanded but earned through unimpeachable competence and character. 6 months later, a congressional hearing room buzzed with activity as Astria, now in dress uniform with her full decorations visible, prepared to testify about the Combat Integration Assessment Task Force's findings. The oak-paneled room, with its high ceiling and formal atmosphere, contrasted sharply with the muddy training ground where the assessment had culminated. Yet, both represented spaces where power dynamics were negotiated and either reinforced or transformed. News headlines appeared on screens throughout the room, documenting the fallout from her report. Pentagon overhauls, elite training protocols. Following whistleblower report. Fort Callister, incident prompts, military-wide review of harassment policies. Captain Rhodes' testimony expected to change combat integration standards. Before entering the hearing room, Astria encountered Farron Isaacs, now wearing the insignia of a successfully completed elite training program. The transformation in Farron was evident not just in her uniform, but in her bearing, the confidence of someone who had proven herself against genuine standards. They are calling it the Rhodes Standard now, Farron told her. The new assessment protocols at Callister. 17 women have entered the program since you left. 4 of us completed it last month. And Orion? Astria asked. Tough but fair, Farron responded. The kind of instructor who builds warriors instead of breaking spirits. Latimer says it is the best training in the military now. As they parted ways, Astria's former commanding officer from 5th Group, Colonel Everett, approached. His presence represented a connection to her operational past, a reminder of her identity beyond the assessment role that had brought her to national attention. Ready for the spotlight, Captain? He asked. This testimony will make you the face of the integration effort, for better or worse. I never wanted to be the face of anything, sir, she responded honestly. I just wanted the chance to do the job I was trained for. Sometimes the most important missions find us rather than the other way around, Everett observed. What happened at Callister has already changed more than you know. 3 other training facilities have quietly removed instructors with similar histories. Sometimes the right person in the wrong situation is exactly what the system needs. As Astria entered the hearing room, the camera pulled back to show young women in military uniforms across the country, watching the live broadcast of her testimony. In barracks, training facilities, and forward operating bases, female service members gathered around screens, witnessing someone who represented not just possibility, but proven reality. The image carried power beyond words, the visual confirmation that excellence knew no gender, that capability was not determined by category but by character, training, and opportunity. For many watching, it represented not just a policy change, but a fundamental shift in what was possible for their own careers and contributions. The final shot showed a new training cycle at Fort Callister, where recruits, men and women in equal numbers, faced the same rigorous standards with determined focus. On the training ground where Astria was once pushed into the mud, now stood a simple plaque. Excellence knows no gender, the road's standard. The memorial served not as a celebration of one individual, but as a reminder of a principle, a standard to which all training would now be held. It represented a transformation that extended beyond policy into culture, the beginning of change that would ripple through generations of future warriors. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? The quiet warriors who change systems from within rarely make headlines, but their impact echoes through generations. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Share your stories of unsung heroes in the comments below, and subscribe to see more moments when quiet strength changes everything.